This happened 3 summers ago, back when I was still with Sarah. I have kept this story to myself for a long time, not because I am embarrassed, but because talking about it brings back feelings I would rather forget. Now that Sarah and I have been apart for over 2 years, I think I can finally share what happened that night. Sarah was working as a lifeguard at the country club that summer. The job was perfect for her since she lived in one of those expensive neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone else. Her family had money, and their house showed it. 2 stories, marble floors, and a backyard that could fit 3 regular houses. When the lifeguards decided to throw their end-of-season party, Sarah volunteered her place without hesitation. Her parents were traveling in Europe for the month, which meant we had the house to ourselves. This was not unusual. Sarah's parents traveled constantly for business, leaving her alone most of the time. The party was supposed to be small, but word got around. By 9 o'clock, the house was packed with people I had never seen before. The music was loud, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. I was not much of a party person, but I stayed close to Sarah and tried to enjoy myself. Around 10:30, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The backyard was quieter than the house, with only a few people sitting by the pool. I walked to the edge of the property, where a tall fence separated Sarah's yard from the woods behind it. That is when I saw him. A man was standing just inside the tree line, maybe 20 feet away from the fence. He was not moving, just standing there watching the house. The moonlight was bright enough that I could make out his shape, but his face was hidden in shadow. I called out to him, asking if he needed help. He did not respond. He just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue. I waited for a few minutes, thinking maybe he had not heard me over the music from the house. When I called out again, louder this time, he finally moved. He took 3 slow steps forward, closer to the fence. I could see him better now. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. His face was pale, almost white in the moonlight. What bothered me most were his eyes. They were too dark, like empty holes in his face. He spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but somehow I heard every word clearly. He asked if Sarah's parents were home. The question sent a chill down my spine. How did he know this was Sarah's house? How did he know her parents? I told him yes, they were inside. It was a lie, but I did not want this stranger to know the house was full of drunk teenagers with no adults around. He nodded slowly, never taking those dark eyes off me. Then he asked when they would be back from Europe. My blood turned cold. I had never mentioned Europe. Neither had anyone else within earshot. This man knew Sarah's parents were traveling, and he knew where they had gone. I backed away from the fence, my heart pounding in my chest. The man smiled then, and I will never forget that smile. His teeth were too sharp, and there were too many of them. He told me he would wait. Then he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing between the trees like he had never been there at all. I ran back to the house, pushing through the crowd of people until I found Sarah. She was in the kitchen, laughing with some friends. When I tried to tell her what had happened, she brushed me off. She said I was being paranoid and that I needed to relax. Her friends agreed, joking that I had probably seen a neighbor walking their dog. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that man was still out there, waiting. The party continued, getting louder and more chaotic as the night went on. I tried to enjoy myself, but I could not stop thinking about the stranger in the woods. Every few minutes, I found myself looking out the windows, searching for any sign of movement in the darkness. Around midnight, I was in the living room when the lights went out. The music stopped, and the house fell silent, except for confused voices asking what had happened. Someone said the power had probably blown a fuse, which made sense given how many people were using electricity at once. Sarah found a flashlight and went down to the basement to check the breaker box. I followed her, along with a few others who were in the house. The basement was pitch black and smelled of damp concrete. Sarah's flashlight beam danced across the walls as we made our way to the electrical panel. That is when we heard the footsteps upstairs. The sound was different from the shuffling and stumbling of drunk party guests. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was walking through the house room by room. These footsteps had a purpose. Sarah called out, asking who was up there. No one answered. The footsteps continued, moving from the living room toward the kitchen. I counted at least 10 people in the basement with us, which meant most of the party was accounted for. So, who was walking around upstairs? One of Sarah's friends, a guy named Mike, said he would go check it out. He took the flashlight from Sarah and headed up the basement stairs. The rest of us waited in the darkness, listening to his footsteps as he walked across the floor above us. Then Mike screamed. It was not a yell or a shout of surprise. It was a scream of pure terror, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl and your stomach drop. The scream cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. Sarah called Mike's name, but he did not answer. Someone else had a phone with a flashlight, and we used it to find our way upstairs. The main floor was empty. We searched every room, calling for Mike, but he was nowhere to be found. The front door was standing wide open. We went outside and looked around the yard, calling Mike's name. There was no sign of him anywhere. His car was still in the driveway, keys inside. It was like he had simply vanished. That is when Sarah noticed the muddy footprints on the front porch. They were bare feet, long and narrow, with what looked like claw marks where the toenails should have been. The prints led from the door to the edge of the porch, then disappeared. I told everyone we needed to call the police, but Sarah refused. She said her parents would kill her if they found out about the party. She convinced everyone that Mike had probably just run outside and was hiding somewhere, playing a prank on us. But I knew better. I knew the man from the woods had come for us, just like he said he would. Most of the party guests left after that, spooked by Mike's disappearance and the power outage. Only a few people remained, mostly Sarah's closest friends, who were too drunk to drive home. We managed to get the electricity working again, but the house felt different now, empty and cold, despite the warm summer night. I convinced Sarah to let me stay over, claiming I was too tired to drive. The truth was, I did not want to leave her alone. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. The man in the woods was not finished with us. Sarah's friends crashed in the guest rooms, and Sarah and I went up to her bedroom on the second floor. She fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the party and the stress of Mike's disappearance. I lay awake beside her, listening to every sound the house made. Around 3 a.m, I heard scratching. It was coming from outside, like fingernails dragging across wood. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, which faced the backyard. At first, I did not see anything unusual. Then, I looked down at the side of the house, directly below Sarah's window. The man from the woods was there, clinging to the wall like a spider. His fingers ended in long, sharp claws that he was using to climb up the side of the house. His pale face was turned upward, looking right at me through the window. That same terrible smile spread across his face, showing those rows of needle-sharp teeth. I shook Sarah awake, frantically telling her to look out the window. But when she looked, he was gone. She accused me of having a nightmare and told me to go back to sleep. I tried to explain what I had seen, but she would not listen. She was angry that I had woken her up over what she called a bad dream. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in a chair by the window, watching the yard and the tree line beyond. The man did not return, but I knew he was out there somewhere, waiting for his next opportunity. The next morning, we found scratches in the wood siding below Sarah's bedroom window. They were deep gouges, like something with very sharp claws had climbed up the side of the house. Sarah stared at the marks for a long time, finally starting to believe that something was really wrong. We called the police then, reporting both Mike's disappearance and the strange incidents at the house. The officers took our statements and searched the property, but they found no sign of Mike or the mysterious intruder. They said they would keep an eye on the house and asked us to call if anything else happened. Sarah's parents came home early from their trip when they heard about Mike. They were furious about the party, but their anger turned to concern when Sarah told them about the man in the woods. Her father hired a security company to install cameras and motion sensors around the property. Mike was never found. The police investigation went nowhere, with no physical evidence and no witnesses except for me and Sarah. After a few weeks, the case went cold. Mike's family moved away, unable to bear living in the same town where their son had vanished. Sarah and I broke up a few months later. The events of that night had changed both of us, but in different ways. I became paranoid and anxious, jumping at every shadow and unexpected sound. Sarah became reckless and defiant, as if she was daring something terrible to happen again. I moved to a different state for college and tried to put that summer behind me. For a while, I thought I had succeeded. I made new friends, started dating someone new, and convinced myself that what had happened was just a series of coincidences and misunderstandings. Then, last month, I got a phone call from Sarah's mother. Sarah had disappeared 3 days earlier. She had been house-sitting for a family friend while they were out of town. When the family returned, they found the front door open and Sarah nowhere to be found. Her car was in the driveway, her purse was on the kitchen counter, but she was gone. The police found muddy footprints on the front porch, leading from the door to the edge of the property. They were bare feet, long and narrow, with claw marks where the toenails should have been. Sarah's mother asked if I had any idea what might have happened to her daughter. She remembered the strange events from that summer 3 years ago and wondered if there might be a connection. I told her I did not know anything that could help, but that was a lie. I knew exactly what had happened to Sarah. The man in the woods had finally come back to finish what he started. He had been waiting all this time, patient and persistent, for the right moment to strike. I think about Sarah often now, wondering if she is still alive somewhere or if she met the same fate as Mike. I wonder if that thing is still out there, waiting and watching for its next victim. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder if it is watching me too. This happened 3 years ago, during my senior year of high school. I was 18 and still living at home with my parents. They had decided to visit my grandmother for her birthday, a 4-hour drive away. And for the first time in my memory, they left me behind. My parents were homebodies who rarely traveled anywhere together. Dad worked from his home office, and Mom managed the household with military precision. The idea of them taking a weekend trip felt completely out of character. When they announced their plans, I tried not to show how excited I was about having the house to myself. I immediately called Elena, my girlfriend of 8 months, and asked if she wanted to come over for the weekend. She jumped at the chance. Elena was spontaneous and fearless in ways that both thrilled and worried me. Looking back, those same qualities probably contributed to why we broke up a few months later. But that is another story entirely. Saturday evening, we decided to watch movies in the basement. My parents had converted half of it into a home theater with a large screen and surround sound. The other half housed my dad's workshop, filled with tools and half-finished projects. Elena loved the setup and insisted we watch horror movies, despite my protests that they would give her nightmares. We were halfway through the second movie when Elena paused it and suggested we go upstairs to get more snacks. The basement felt stuffy, and I agreed we needed some fresh air. As we climbed the stairs, I noticed how quiet the house felt, without my parents moving around upstairs. The kitchen is connected to our living room through a wide archway. Large windows lined the back wall, offering a clear view of our yard during the day. At night, with the interior lights on, those same windows turned into black mirrors that reflected everything inside. Elena was rummaging through the pantry when I glanced toward the windows. Something made me freeze. In the reflection, I could see our living room clearly. But there was something wrong. A figure stood near the far wall, partially hidden behind my mother's reading chair. I stared harder, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. The figure moved slightly, as if shifting weight from one foot to the other. My blood turned cold. I grabbed Elena's arm and whispered that we needed to leave the kitchen immediately. She looked at me with confusion, but something in my expression must have convinced her not to ask questions. We backed out of the kitchen slowly, and I led her toward the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the locks. Once we were outside, I explained what I had seen. Elena wanted to call the police right away, but I convinced her to let me check the house first. I had grown up here and knew every sound it made. If someone were inside, I would be able to tell. I retrieved the baseball bat from our garage and told Elena to wait by her car with the keys ready. If anything happened, she should drive away and call for help. She nodded, but insisted on keeping her phone ready to dial 911. I entered through the front door and moved carefully through each room on the ground floor. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but as I looked closer, small details seemed off. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged differently than I remembered. A book on the coffee table was open to a page I had not been reading. The thermostat had been adjusted to a temperature my family had never used. These changes were subtle, the kind of things that could easily be explained away or dismissed as forgetfulness. But I knew someone had been inside. I could feel it in the way the air seemed disturbed, like the aftermath of movement in a still room. I searched every closet, checked behind every piece of furniture, and even looked under beds. I found nothing. All the doors remained locked, and every window was secure. If someone had been inside, they would have vanished completely. After 20 minutes of searching, I called Elena back inside, and we contacted the police. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes and conducted their own thorough search. They found no signs of forced entry, and no evidence that anyone had been inside. One officer suggested that the stress of being alone might have caused me to imagine things, but his partner seemed less dismissive. The older officer asked detailed questions about what I had seen and took notes as I described the small changes I had noticed. He walked through the house again, paying special attention to the windows and doors. Before leaving, he suggested we stay somewhere else for the night, but we had nowhere to go. We decided to sleep in my bedroom on the 2nd floor. I pushed my dresser against the door and kept the baseball bat within reach. Elena tried to lighten the mood by joking about our ruined movie night, but I could tell she was as unsettled as I was. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of water running in the kitchen below us. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the sound continued for several minutes. I listened carefully and heard what sounded like dishes being moved around in the sink. My heart hammered against my chest as I reached for the bat. Elena was still asleep beside me. I considered waking her, but decided against it. If someone was downstairs, I did not want them to know we were awake. I moved the dresser as quietly as possible and crept down the hallway. The sounds from the kitchen had stopped, but now I could hear soft footsteps moving through the living room. Whoever was down there was not trying to be particularly quiet anymore. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down into the darkness. The footsteps moved toward the front of the house, and I heard the soft click of the front door opening. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, the door was standing wide open, and cool night air was flowing into the house. I checked every room again, but whoever had been inside was gone. This time, I did not bother calling the police. What could they do that they had not already done? I locked the door and returned upstairs, but sleep was impossible. I sat by the window, watching the street until sunrise. Elena woke around 7 and immediately knew something had happened. I told her about the night visitor, and she insisted we leave the house until my parents returned. We spent Sunday at her house, but I could not stop thinking about what might be happening at home. When my parents returned that evening, I told them everything. They listened carefully and seemed more concerned than I had expected. The next morning, we discovered the full extent of the intrusion. Every sharp knife in our kitchen was missing. The carving knives, the paring knives, even the steak knives from the drawer. But they had left behind other valuable items that would have been easy to carry and sell. Stranger still, they had rearranged items throughout the house in ways that served no apparent purpose. Books were moved from one shelf to another. Picture frames were turned to face the wall. My mother's jewelry box had been opened, but nothing was taken. My parents filed a police report, but the officers seemed as baffled as we were. The missing knives felt like a threat, but against whom and for what reason remained unclear. We changed all the locks and installed a security system, but the feeling of violation lingered. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about that weekend. I never figured out how someone entered our house twice without leaving any trace. I never understood why they took only the knives while leaving behind electronics and cash. Most of all, I never forgot the feeling of being watched from within my own home. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They exist to remind us that the world contains more darkness than we want to acknowledge, and sometimes that darkness comes looking for us when we least expect it. This happened last spring during our annual Spring Fling weekend. I attend Millfield University, and for those who don't know, Spring Fling is our biggest campus celebration. It happens every May on the main quad, right next to the old administration building. There are food vendors, live music, games, and usually a big-name performer as the headliner. The entire student body comes out. It's supposed to be the highlight of the semester. I was a junior at the time, and like most students, I stayed out late celebrating. Millfield sits in a small college town. Brookdale has always felt safe, even in the early morning hours. That's why I wasn't concerned when I left my roommate's apartment and started walking back to Palmer Residence Hall alone. What I didn't realize was that earlier that evening, around midnight, a group of people in dark clothing had been spotted moving through campus. About 8 or 9 of them, all wearing masks. They had been seen near several dormitories, including Palmer. I never witnessed this myself, but students were already sharing warnings on social media while it was happening. I hadn't checked my phone. I just wanted to get back to my room. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I used my keycard to enter Palmer Hall. I walked through the lobby toward the elevator bank when I noticed someone sitting in the common area. That wasn't unusual by itself. College students keep all kinds of hours, but this person was wearing a mask, not a medical mask, a full black face covering that looked almost like a ski mask. He sat perfectly still, completely silent. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. I actually stopped walking and stood there near the mailboxes, trying to process the situation. Nothing about it made sense. I couldn't figure out why someone would be sitting there like that, but something deep in my stomach told me this was wrong. Then he stood up quickly and turned toward me in one smooth movement. I didn't hesitate. I ran toward the nearest stairwell and pushed through the door, letting it slam shut behind me. I stayed on that staircase for what felt like 10 minutes, long enough for the building to become quiet again. I told myself I was being paranoid, but every instinct I had was telling me to stay hidden. Finally, I opened the door just enough to look out. The lobby appeared empty. I thought maybe he had left the building. I stepped out carefully. I didn't want to run and make myself panic even more, so I walked normally toward the side exit. That's when I saw him again. He was back in the common area, still wearing the mask. This time, he was positioned where he could see both exits clearly. There was a bicycle leaning against the wall next to him, and he had moved one of the heavy chairs to block part of the doorway. I had a small container of pepper spray attached to my keys. I took it out and held it where he could see it. I didn't point it at him or make any threats. I just wanted him to know I had protection. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. I walked past him toward the exit. He didn't move to stop me. He didn't even shift position. It felt like he wanted me to notice him there. Like, causing fear was exactly what he intended. I kept my eyes forward and pushed through the exit door. I was halfway across the parking lot when I heard bicycle wheels behind me. 4 more masked figures rode up alongside me. They didn't touch me or try to block my path, but they were calling out things I couldn't understand, laughing among themselves. That might sound relatively harmless, but several of them were holding what appeared to be weapons. They looked like guns, though they could have been replicas or toy guns. It was obvious they were trying to frighten me. I kept walking and tried to ignore them, but I could sense how close they were staying, just outside of arm's reach. I reached Morrison Hall and sent a message to my friend, asking him to meet me outside. He came down and walked me back to Palmer, which made me feel much safer. The cyclists were gone by that point. I didn't contact security that night. I hadn't been physically harmed, but I was genuinely terrified. I still can't fully explain the level of fear I felt. The next morning, I called my parents and told them everything. My father ended up reporting the incident. And that evening, several of my male friends texted me that they had also encountered groups of masked individuals. A few of them mentioned seeing weapons as well. No one was injured, but it was serious enough that campus security began investigating. I've heard different theories about who those people were. Some students think it was just local teenagers trying to scare college kids. The weapon detail is what bothers me most. The possibility that a group of armed strangers had gotten into my dormitory that night, the place where I sleep, still haunts me. I haven't walked alone on campus after dark since then.